Everything was gone in less than 3 seconds. I know that because I looked it up later, lying in a hospital bed with nothing but time and a cracked phone screen. The average car crash lasts between 2 and 3 seconds from first impact to full stop. 2 to 3 seconds. That is less time than it takes to read a sentence. Less time than it takes to blink twice and decide what you are looking at. Less time than it took me to understand that the headlights coming through the intersection were not slowing down. I had left work late that Tuesday evening. Nothing dramatic about the day. My name is Daniel Marsh, and I was 33 years old, working a mid-level logistics job in the city of Grayson, driving a 6-year-old sedan that needed new tires, eating gas station sandwiches more often than I would like to admit. I was not thinking about anything important when it happened. I was trying to remember whether I had turned off the stove that morning. That was the last thought I had before the world came apart. The other vehicle was a commercial van that had run a red light at full speed. It hit my driver's side door. The force of it pushed my car sideways across 2 lanes and into a concrete barrier. I do not remember the sound. I do not remember the pain. I only remember the light changing from the yellow glow of street lamps to pure white, and then nothing at all. When I opened my eyes, I was somewhere bright and quiet and unfamiliar. Everything smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. My mouth felt like it had been packed with dry cotton. My left arm would not move the way I told it to. There was a tube in my right hand and a soft beeping sound somewhere to my left, steady and patient, like it had been waiting a long time for me to wake up. I had no idea what day it was. A nurse came in before I could figure out how to speak. She was checking something on a screen near the door, and she had not noticed I was awake yet. Then she turned around. She looked at my open eyes, and she went very still. Not the way someone freezes when they are startled. The way someone freezes when they are trying to hold themselves together. She pressed her lips tight, exhaled slowly through her nose, and walked toward my bed. Her name badge read Cara Ellison. Her eyes were steady but full of something I could not name yet. Then she said it, quietly, almost to herself. "It's really you." I tried to speak. What came out was closer to gravel scraping concrete than actual words. But she understood. She filled a small cup with water, helped me take a sip, and watched me with that same expression I could not figure out. Like someone reading a book they had read before, feeling everything all over again from the first page. I asked her what had happened. She told me about the crash, briefly and clearly, the way medical people do when they want you to have the facts without the weight of them all at once. 2 broken ribs. A fractured left collarbone. Internal bleeding they had stopped during emergency surgery. A concussion that had kept me unconscious for 4 days. For days. I had been lying in this room for 4 days and had no idea. I asked her if she knew me. She paused, looked at her hands for just a moment, then looked back up at me with something careful in her expression and said, "Yes." From a long time ago, before I could ask anything else, the attending doctor walked in and Cara stepped back, and the conversation became blood pressure readings and recovery timelines and questions about what I could feel and where. By the time the doctor left, Cara was gone too. Just like that. The most confusing part of waking up from a near-fatal crash was not the pain or the disorientation. It was a nurse who looked at me like I was someone she had been waiting to find, and then disappeared before I could ask her a single real question. I spent the rest of that first day trying to take stock of myself, moving my fingers, testing what hurt and what was numb. The ribs were the worst. Every breath had a cost. The nurses who came and went were kind and efficient and completely unreadable in the way that professionals learn to be. But none of them were Cara. I found myself looking toward the door more than made sense. By evening, a doctor came in to explain the surgery in more detail. He used the word lucky 3 times in 4 minutes. I counted. Lucky the impact had not been 6 inches further forward. Lucky the airbag had deployed the way it did. Lucky someone had called emergency services within 90 seconds. I understood what he meant. I also understood that lucky was the last thing my body felt like right then, with its cracked bones and its bruised organs and its tubes and its monitors and its 4 missing days. My phone had survived the crash in my jacket pocket, screen cracked down the middle but functional. I had 17 missed calls and 42 messages. I read none of them that night. I just held the phone and stared at the ceiling and kept thinking about what Cara Ellison had said. The way she said it. The certainty behind it. Not like a question. Not like someone unsure. Like someone who had been carrying a name for a very long time and had finally gotten the chance to say it out loud. "It's really you." I had absolutely no idea what she meant. And somehow that scared me more than the crash. Pain has a way of making time move strangely. Some hours in that hospital room felt like 10 minutes. Others felt like entire seasons were passing outside the window while I lay there watching the light shift from pale morning gray to afternoon yellow to the quiet blue of early evening. My body was doing the hard, invisible work of trying to put itself back together. My mind, thanks to the concussion, was doing something far less cooperative. Whole patches of memory felt like rooms I could not find the door to. I remembered my mother's phone number, but not the name of the street I had lived on at 14. I remembered how to do my job, but not where I had parked my car the morning of the crash. The doctors said this was normal, that the brain protects itself by going selectively quiet, that things would come back. What they did not warn me about was how unsettling it would feel to not know what was missing. Cara came back the following morning. I was awake before she arrived, which felt like a small victory. She checked my vitals, adjusted the 4-line, and made a note on the tablet she carried. She moved efficiently, professionally, like someone who had been doing this long enough that the routine had become its own kind of language. But when she thought I was resting, she would glance at me differently. Briefly, like someone checking on something they were not sure was real. I watched her do it twice before I said anything. I told her I was awake. She did not seem embarrassed. She just looked at me steadily and asked how I was feeling. I told her my ribs felt like someone had replaced them with broken glass. She said that was about right for day 5. I asked her again about what she had said the night I woke up. She set the tablet down on the small counter beside the monitor and was quiet for a moment. Then she said she had grown up in Clover Falls. I had grown up in Clover Falls. Left when I was 17 after my father got a job transfer to Millhaven, and I had not been back since. It was one of those small towns that exists perfectly fine without you once you leave, and you spend years convincing yourself you were not shaped by it. Population just over 4,000. 1 main road, 2 schools, a diner that smelled like maple syrup regardless of what you ordered. She said the name of the town and watched my face carefully. I asked her when she had lived there. She said from age 11 to 15. I did the math without meaning to. Our years in Clover Falls had overlapped. Somewhere in that small town, our lives had crossed, and she remembered it clearly. And I was searching through fog-covered corridors in my own memory, trying to find even a trace of it. She did not push. She said something about letting me rest, and was halfway to the door when I told her the concussion had taken some things I had not gotten back yet. She stopped, turned around, and for a second, something moved across her face that was hard to watch. Not quite sadness. Something more patient than sadness. Like someone who had learned to hold disappointment gently rather than let it do damage. She said she understood. Then she left. I stared at the wall for a long time after that. Physical therapy started on day 6. It was not what I expected. I had imagined something gradual, almost gentle. What it actually looked like was a woman named Petra standing beside a parallel bar and asking me to do things my body greeted with outright protest. Standing, shifting weight, taking 3 steps and back. It sounds simple. It was not simple. My collarbone screamed every time I tried to use my left arm for balance. My ribs made deep breathing feel like a negotiation with something hostile living inside my chest. But the thing about physical pain is that it is honest. It tells you exactly where you are. Unlike memory loss, which is vague and shifting and leaves you guessing, pain is specific. This bone, this muscle, this exact movement. I found myself almost preferring it to the confusion. At least I knew what I was dealing with. Cara was not in physical therapy with me, but she was there when I got back to the room afterward, exhausted and irritable and covered in a cold sweat that had nothing to do with fever. She handed me a small towel without saying anything, poured water into my cup, sat in the chair near the window while I caught my breath. I asked her to tell me something about Clover Falls. Anything. A place, a detail, something I might recognize. She thought about it. Then she said there used to be a path behind Eastfield Middle School that cut through a narrow strip of woods down to an old creek. Kids used it as a shortcut in summer, but avoided it in winter because the ground turned to mud and stayed that way until April. I stopped breathing for a second. I knew that path. I knew the mud. I knew the creek. And somewhere attached to that memory, barely visible, like something written in pencil that had been mostly erased, there was a shape. A person. A girl sitting on the bank with her shoes off, not swimming, just sitting. Alone. I looked at Cara across the room. She was watching me quietly. Not asking. just watching, like someone standing at the edge of something and waiting to see whether the other person would find their way to the same place on their own. My heart was beating harder than it had any business doing for someone lying still in a hospital bed. I knew that creak, and I was beginning to think I knew her too. She said one sentence, and I felt something crack open inside my chest that had nothing to do with my broken ribs. I had just told her I remembered the creek. I remembered the mud path behind Eastfield Middle. I remembered the girl sitting alone on the bank with her shoes off. And Cara, who had been so careful and so patient and so quietly restrained through every conversation we had shared in that hospital room, finally let her guard down by exactly 1 inch. She said, "You were the only person who ever came and sat beside me." That was it. That was the sentence. I did not sleep that night. Not because of the pain, though the pain was still very much present and still very much making its opinions known. I did not sleep because something had shifted in the architecture of my memory. It was like a door I had walked past 1,000 times had suddenly shown me it was not a wall after all. I lay there in the dark with the monitors beeping softly and the corridor sounds drifting under the door, and I pulled at the thread she had given me. The creek, the girl, the path through the woods. And then, slowly, the way a photograph develops in a dark room, more details began to appear. She had been in 6th grade. New to Clover Falls, new to Eastfield, new to the specific and unforgiving social rules of a small town where everyone already knew everyone and had for years. Her name had been Cara, though I had not connected that name to the woman standing in my hospital room until this moment. She had been quiet in the way that reads as strange to kids who do not yet understand that some people go quiet because the world has not given them a safe reason to be loud. I remembered the first time I saw her at the creek. I had been cutting through the woods on my way home from school, headphones in, not paying attention to much. She was sitting at the bank with her socks bundled next to her, dragging one foot slowly through the water. She did not look up when I came through the trees. I almost kept walking. Almost. I sat down about 3 feet away from her and said something genuinely stupid about whether the creek ever had fish in it. She looked at me like I had arrived from a different planet. I told her I was Daniel. She told me her name. We sat there for about 20 minutes saying almost nothing, and when I got up to leave I told her the path was faster if you cut left after the second big oak. She nodded. That was the whole conversation. But I went back the next day, and the day after that. When I told Cara I remembered all of this, she was quiet for so long that I started to think I had gotten something wrong. Then she turned toward the window, and I saw her shoulders rise with a long, slow breath. And when she turned back her eyes were wet, but she was not crying. She looked like someone who had carried something heavy for a very long time and had just been allowed to set it down. She told me what happened after my family moved away. Her father had lost steady work the following winter. They stayed in Clover Falls for another year before moving to a relative's house 2 states away, and those 12 months were some of the hardest of her life. The kids at school had not softened. The loneliness had not lifted. But she said there was one thing that kept returning to her during that time, like a fixed point she could orient herself around. Someone had once thought she was worth sitting next to. Someone had once shown up 2 days in a row without being asked. That, she said, is not a small thing when you are 12 years old and the world is telling you the opposite. She had gone on to finish school, put herself through a community college program, and eventually earned her nursing degree at 26. She worked in 3 different hospitals before landing at Grayson General 4 years ago. She was 31 now. Nearly 20 years had passed since that creek. I asked her how she had recognized me when I was brought in. She said she almost had not. The beard was new. The years had done their work on both of us. But then a colleague had read my name off the intake form out loud, and something in her went completely still. Daniel Marsh from Clover Falls. She had stood outside my room for 2 full minutes before walking in. I looked at the bracelet on her wrist. Thin silver, worn smooth in places, the kind of worn that comes from years of daily contact with a life being lived. I had bought it at a small shop near the Clover Falls bus stop with money I had saved doing yard work one summer. I had given it to her the week before my family's moving truck pulled away. I barely remembered doing it. She had never taken it off. I did not know what to do with that information. There is no clean response to learning that something you did at 15 without thinking twice became something another person held on to for 2 decades. It does not fit inside a normal-size feeling. It sits outside all the usual categories and asks you to just stay with it for a while. So I did. We both did. The room was quiet. The monitors beeped. Somewhere down the corridor, a cart rolled past. And neither of us felt the need to fill the silence, because some things are better understood without words trying to explain them. I was supposed to go home in 11 days. I know because I had been counting them down like a kid, marking off days before a school break, crossing each one mentally, and telling myself the next would be easier. I had started sleeping through the night. I had managed the corridor walk twice without stopping. Petra had told me my progress was strong for someone with my injury profile, and I had carried that sentence around like a small trophy. Then day 9 arrived, and my body staged a full reversal. The fever came on fast. By afternoon, it had climbed high enough that the room stopped making sense to me. Doctors moved in and out quickly, voices overlapping, words like secondary infection and inflammation levels and adjusted protocol landing around me, while I lay there feeling like I had been emptied out and filled back up with something hot and heavy. They told me the discharge date was off the table. They told me there were decisions to make. They told me this was manageable, but not minor. I heard all of it. I understood most of it. And then I turned my face toward the wall and felt something I had not allowed myself to feel since waking up in this room almost 3 weeks earlier. I felt completely defeated. Cara was not on shift when the fever peaked. A different nurse monitored me through the worst of the night, competent and attentive, and I was grateful. But when morning came and I heard familiar footsteps in the corridor, I had to work hard to keep my face from doing something embarrassing. She came in, read the overnight notes, checked my chart, and then pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down. She did not offer me a pep talk. She did not tell me I had come too far to give up now. She did not say any of the things that sound correct, but land hollow when someone is lying in a hospital bed at their lowest point. Instead, she told me about her second year of nursing school. She had failed a critical exam. Not barely failed. Failed badly enough that her scholarship was in review and she had been asked to meet with the program director. She had sat in her car in the school parking lot for over an hour that afternoon, convinced she had finally reached the place where everything she had worked toward was going to be taken back. She said the fear was so loud inside her head that she could not think around it. But then she made herself do one thing. Just one. She drove home, made dinner, and studied for 3 hours. Not because she felt hopeful. Not because she was sure it would work. Just because it was the next thing, and doing the next thing was the only power she had left. She passed the makeup exam by 4 points. I listened to all of this and said nothing for a while. Outside the window, a flock of birds crossed the sky in a loose and shifting shape, moving together without any single one of them leading. I watched them until they were gone. I told her I was tired in a way that sleep did not fix. She said she knew. She said that kind of tired was different from physical tired, that it lived in a different part of a person. And then she said something I was not expecting. She said that when she had been at her lowest, the thing that had actually helped was not a grand plan or a reason to keep going. It was remembering that someone had once shown up for her without being asked. That proof was enough to keep moving. She was not talking about the exam anymore. I started the new treatment protocol that afternoon. The fever took 4 more days to fully clear. Physical therapy resumed carefully, on a revised schedule, shorter sessions with more rest between them. Progress was slower the second time around. It asked more of me. But something had settled in my chest that was not there before, something steadier than motivation, something closer to resolve. The day I finally walked out of Grayson General, Cara was at the end of the corridor, not making a scene of it, just standing there in her scrubs with her hands in her pockets, the silver bracelet catching the light from the window above the exit doors. I walked the whole length of that corridor without stopping. It was the farthest I had walked unassisted since the crash. She handed me a small envelope when I reached her. Inside was a photograph, old and slightly faded, 2 kids sitting on a creek bank in late afternoon light. I was looking at the water. She was looking at the camera. I did not remember anyone taking it. I looked up at her and could not find the right words, which almost never happens to me. She smiled and said, "You showed up twice for me. Once at that creek, and once by surviving long enough for me to show up for you." I drove home slowly, the photograph on the passenger seat beside me. The city looked the same as it always had. But I kept thinking about that girl at the creek, and the bracelet that never came off, and how a 20-minute conversation between 2 kids in a small town had quietly woven itself into the fabric of 2 entire lives without either of them knowing. Some things you do for others plant seeds you never get to watch grow. You just have to trust they go somewhere. Because sometimes, 20 years later, they find their way back to you.